So the main problem we're trying to solve is that there is not that much funding for infrastructure in general. You have like second order effects. Once you consider that, then you get to consider that the team that are working on the infrastructure actually don't have incentive that are very well aligned with the system, right? Like you want those people to have incentive of maximizing the utility and the value of the coin. We want to solve that. And the most straightforward way to solve that is charge for your services. And so the direction that we're going with Bitcoin ABC is that we are not charging anyone for using the software in general, except miners. This is going to fund effectively the infrastructure that we're building. I think the incentives are pretty well aligned, right? Because we want to maximize the value of the whole ecosystem.
So, hey everyone, I have the awesome pleasure of speaking with the one and only Amaury Séchet of Bitcoin ABC. And we're going to talk a lot about the upcoming, the IFP, the Infrastructure Funding Plan, and of course, the concept of governance and funding development teams as a whole. So how's it going?
Oh, it's going great.
Yeah, as I'm sure you've had a crazy week, more crazy than the rest of the recent weeks and months. And so basically, there's been a big dispute in specifically the Bitcoin Cash community about where do we get our funding from for development. And right now, it seems like Bitcoin ABC has gone ahead with a plan, and the plan has taken, and the community has just jumped on two sides of the plan. There's a lot that hate it. There's a lot that are very much in favor of it. And I see a lot of social media engineering kind of activity. Like I've recognized this. I paid attention during the Bitcoin scaling wars. I paid attention to other things. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to fight over a narrative. So I see plenty of that. So for those who don't know exactly what the infrastructure funding plan is, do you mind giving a short description of what it is from your perspective?
Yeah, so from our perspective, it's very much the node software is charging for its services, right? Effectively, it's like so the main problem we're trying to solve is that there is not that much funding for infrastructure in general, and you have like second order effects that go with that, right? Because once you consider that, then you get to consider that the team that are working on the infrastructure actually don't have incentive that are very well aligned with the system, right? Like you want those people to have incentive of maximizing the utility and the value of the coin. But effectively, we can see in the space a lot where situation where teams have different incentives. And so we want to solve that. And the most straightforward way to solve that is, like has been done on markets, like forever, you just charge for your services. And so the direction that we're going with Bitcoin ABC is that we are not charging anyone for using the software in general, except miners. If they want their blocks to be validated by our software, then they're going to have to pay a fee. And this is going to fund effectively the infrastructure that we're building. And I think the incentives are pretty well aligned, right? Because we want to maximize the value of the whole ecosystem so that we can maximize effectively the revenue that we have from that system.
Yeah. So where I've seen a lot of the kind of debate on this whole concept seems to be around a few things. First off is decision making, is in whose right is it to make the decision. Second is do we need to just fund one team, or should one team be deciding for these things? And then the other one is, do we need this? Is there enough development funding already out there? So let's start with the first one, which I think is the most kind of controversial, is when Bitcoin ABC. So Bitcoin ABC, I think it's fair to say, is the original Bitcoin Cash implementation, more or less. It's kind of what started it. And so if you're talking about something like, say, a Zcash or something that has a founder's reward built in, when you create the coin, you just say, okay, 20% of the block reward for the first 5 years or whatever it is goes to the development team. And this is just the way it is. If you want to mine on it, you want to be part of it, you know it full well what you're getting into. This is exactly what you know. And then, I mean, it's hard to really tell with these kinds of things, but I think it's worked out pretty well for Zcash. They seem to have had good development funding. They seem to have built a lot of cool tech. And I don't mean they're not super high ranked and never have been, but on the markets, but it seems like, it seems like mission accomplished.
So yeah, I don't know, because they've done a lot of very like groundbreaking tech. They're really a world-class team, and the coins has not launched. Like the coin is not very old, so the inflation is like crazy high. I think it's still like 40% a year or something like that. Yeah. So the fact that it's just not going, like through the bottom of market cap is I think quite indicative that people are seeing value there. After a few halving, I fully expect Zcash to gain a few ranks.
Yeah, so that's, I think, the big dispute is no one had to decide what they would pay developers. It was kind of decided at the beginning, and there was no Zcash community or users or miners at all when the decision was made. And so they just got to agree by participating in Zcash, and no one had any ownership claim like, oh, I have all these coins, and then a decision's made that I disagree with, now I'm going to be angry, because there weren't any. And so it seems like if I were to draw a parallel with ABC, let's just say it's a founding development team, but now it's significantly later, like several years later, and now there's a change, and the people were saying, hey, wait, I didn't sign up for this, I didn't agree to this at all, and I'm upset. And so, like, what do you think of that? How do you even resolve that issue?
Yeah, I think this is, I think this is not that big of a deal. And the reason is, like, those people explicitly choose to not be our customers. And so I don't really see a reason to serve them. That's, I mean, that's simple as that. Like, if you go to the sandwich shop near you and you're like, I want a sandwich, but I don't want to pay this, the guy from the sandwich shop is going to be like, all right, but, don't get a sandwich, and that's it, go somewhere else. So that's where I'm at. Some people disagree with that plan, but it seems that those people disagree with any plan, because we've put many different stuff on the table over the past 3 years, and none of them got like significant traction. And so at some point you get to look at what the market is saying, and what the market is saying is that those people are not our customers.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that makes it also a little bit more complicated is that there's a few different development teams that are involved in Bitcoin Cash, and this is where it's the decentralized nature kind of makes things a little bit trickier, because people were always saying that same thing with Bitcoin Core Team, that the Bitcoin Core Team was just the biggest team, but there's other development teams and stuff, but somehow everything they decided always worked for always ended up being implemented for the entire network. And so, I mean, as far as like, I do understand there's a value in having different implementations for, say decentralization purposes, if there's a bug in one or something, but it seems like there is still one team, one code base that kind of moves the project forward. And do you think there seems to be that argument right now that, well, they're not the only people. Bitcoin Unlimited is doing things. Bitcoin Cash Node is doing things. We don't need to pay these guys because the other guys are doing work. And so what happens, I guess, if, let's just, ignore the IFP idea, but what happens if you guys just say, if ABC says, well, we're just not getting paid and we can't live like this, so we're going to get regular day jobs and dissolve the project, and there's other implementations, and that's fine. What happens to Bitcoin Cash under that circumstance where ABC goes away and then there's other developers? Like, what happens to the actual code base moving forward?
I think it would be very chaotic, because those people don't really agree on the path going forward. Actually, very interestingly, the Bitcoin Unlimited team, for instance, has never agreed on the concept that we should have a roadmap at all for BCH because they see that as collusion. So I don't know if they changed their tune more recently or not, but that was, when we launched, that was their tune. So under those conditions, it's going to be total chaos. At some point, if you want that to work, you kind of need to have some kind of definition of what the project is, and it can be several things, right? It can be either, well, this is whatever the main implementation say it is, right? That's one option. It can also be, well, we have this roadmap and those general goals, on how to decide what is in the roadmap or not. And if you want to do those stuff, then good, you're part of the project. And if you want to do something else, then that's fine. You get to do something else. So that's another option. And you see open source software project with those two models pretty much everywhere. Like the first one is like Linus Torvald say what goes into the Linux kernel, right? And at the end, whatever Linus Torvald decide the Linux kernel, what direction the Linux kernel should go into, then that's what it is. And you have also project like Subversion that are going to be like, here is our mission statement, and here is what the kind of roadmap that fit that mission statement. And then there is not really like one person that is in charge of the project, but you get people, coming into the project on a regular basis, and they fit a culture such as, someone comes and they're like, oh, I think Subversion should have feature X because it's going to be so great because whatever reasons, right? Well, if it doesn't fit in the roadmap, people are going to say, well, that's fine. Maybe feature X is great, but this is not what we're trying to do. And this is not what Subversion is. So this is effectively the two paths that you have. I don't see, like the right ecosystem within BCH for the path, like Subversion-like path to take place. Because when people say having a roadmap is collusion, then that this is like
strange.
Yeah, this is not gonna work. And so what happened is that in practice we fall back into option one, like always, except there is a lot of kicking and screaming going on with that. Because this is effectively not what people want, but by rejecting the alternatives as well, like by default, you fall back into that mode.
Yeah. So I have this, I guess, theory or observation that either someone decides or the project forks. And it's kind of that flow chart, if to infinity. So for example, with Bitcoin, with BTC, with Bitcoin, someone decided, in that case Blockstream probably, and then then everyone else, that got BTC has not forked since then, it has not split, and then the split goes to Bitcoin Cash and then split off to SV, who decides there. So they're not probably, they're probably not going to split again. We'll see. And then now it's just like split until you have an idea of like what to do. And that even happened with Monero, that I remember, that for a long time, they were relatively centered around Fluffy Pony and things like that. But at some point, there was a big disagreement, and then it splintered into a million different coins as well. Yeah. So that's the other thing is I have heard that of course, I just like keep an eye on the space, and I just see when, people are complaining about stuff. If I see a few complaints, it's usually that there is something going on. It's not just isolated. And so I've seen a few complaints about developer funding over the past few years. However, I've also seen people say that there's plenty of money for developers. It's just that it's not necessarily for ABC, right? that people will be willing to donate to a project that they like, but they're not impressed with the roadmap or whatever. There's plenty of money available. It's just that it's not a problem that there's no money. It's just that it's not the people complaining about no money, let's just say, aren't doing a good enough job. So I've heard that line. What do you think of that?
So it's a bit of both. Like especially in the early days, it was more option two. Like there was a lot of money going around, but that money went mostly to projects that did not yield that much result. Like for instance, consider that Bitcoin Unlimited has about 100 of magnitude more funding than ABC has. for instance, but they have not succeeded at their original mission to increase the block size on BTC. They have delivered a lot of like low quality software that have caused many problems in production. And, like since then, they didn't have that much of an impact, like even within the BCH ecosystem, they've been more of a source of drama than value added. So this is problem number one, right? Like, yeah, the resources have not been allocated very rationally. But the second stuff is that I think people who have that argument, especially over the past 2 years or so, really don't realize the kind of money that it takes to run those projects. Because like, people are saying that, like, I saw some dude was claiming as some kind of victory to Vitalik Buterin like this week that recently various BCH projects raised together more than $1 million in USD, right?
Yeah.
And to some people that may seem a lot of money, but especially if you say that to Vitalik, you get to realize how ridiculous you sound. Because if you look at how much money various Ethereum projects raised over the same period, like, I don't even know to count that because there are way more, right? But certainly it's above 100 million, right? So there is like 2 orders of magnitude discrepancy here. And so literally Ethereum can be 99% less efficient in how they use the money that they raise, and still would compete us, right? So like, you may make a bunch of claims that, yeah, we have a better system and we are more efficient and we don't need as much resources, but to order of magnitude is really close. So like even Dash has like way more than this, even though it's like lower in terms of market cap and all of that.
Yeah.
But there's still way more money going into maintaining the infrastructure and all of that.
What I remember specifically from Dash is in the end of December of 2017, the monthly available budget was worth about 10 million USD. And I was at $1,600 coin. And so let's just say, at around $80, a little more than that, but let's just say $80 coin, it's probably, what is it? That would be $500,000 per month around. And so it's like, half of it about goes directly to development, and other bits can be created, other things. And then over time, it just can compound. And so it's not a lot. That is not a lot of money compared to like big projects that can, say, raise hundreds of millions or whatever. It's hard to get, 100, like you could get.
No, yeah, but that's still like almost an order of magnitude more than what BCH is raising.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as they call it, it's peanuts. That's what they say.
So I think those people who say, like, there is not, there is money around, but it's not going to ABC because we don't like ABC for whatever reason. They don't have a realistic expectation of the kind of money that it takes to run this kind of project.
Yeah. It's so. I saw something about a council being formed in January to sort of, decide things. And I thought there's some interesting concepts in there. For example, proof of keys for major miners and major stakeholders. And obviously hasn't happened yet. So there's probably a lot to be decided from now until then. But do you have any idea of how that would work that would actually be a good governance council to decide what happens, as opposed to just like we invited people we like and then we'll tell them what we're going to do and then that's it? Like, do you have any ideas of how you'd structure that?
No, so this is not like we invite people we like. It's like we invite people that can prove that they are major actor in that ecosystem, right? And so that would be people who have a major number of coin and have held them over some amount of time. So that you cannot pull like, some kind of trick by borrowing a ton of coin for like a week and participate and then, get on it, right? So you want people that have a lot of coin and that have all those coins, over some period of time, and miners, obviously, right? Because they are effectively building the chain. Because the main problem that we want to solve with that is that the noise to signal ratio is like very bad, effectively. Like you have a bunch of people voicing a bunch of stuff, but it's almost impossible to know who matters and who does not matter, right? And this old technology provide us the tool to prove mathematically who matter and who does not matter, right? So we want to leverage that. As to what it's going to look like very specifically, we have a few ideas, but we also want to leave the room for those people to make decisions for themselves as well. So we don't want to impose everything on them, right? Like we want also to give them an opportunity to bring that stuff in different direction, right? And this is probably what this first council is going to be about for the most part. It's going to be deciding the details of how the whole stuff works.
Yeah, that's one thing that we're taught when we talk about different governance models and talk about who decides or who decides and how do they decide it is basically most of it. And we were talking about one of the things that people did not like about BTC is they wanted the ability to essentially fire Blockstream, fire the Blockstream funded developers, and get new people that can do a better job. And that didn't work out. Probably, the miners didn't really take action, I guess. But that's a huge long.
But I think this whole episode is very misunderstood because like the framework that people have in their mind when they go at it is bogus, right? Because they're like, we want to fire those people, but like, did they hire those people to begin with? And if not, then how do you expect that they can fire them, right? The reality is for BTC is that you add a few groups, Blockstream being one of them, that funded most of the infrastructure work. And because they put like most of the resources required to fund the infrastructure work, they ended up having a large say in the direction in which this is going. And this is not a bug, like this is a feature. You shouldn't expect a bunch of people that yell on social media to have more influence than the people that are actually putting the resources to make stuff happen.
Yeah.
If people wanted to bring Bitcoin in a different direction, they should have hired developer, make them participate in the Bitcoin core software, like for the years that it's take for them to gain a position of influence, and then they have a position of influence. And this is what, like, you see that happening in open source software where there is like a big stake. One example I can take, I think, like a few years ago, there is a very interesting example that happened in the Linux kernel. So I don't know how familiar you are with that, or familiar your audiences with that. But a few years ago, there were a few vulnerabilities that were discovered in Intel CPUs, right? So in the hardware, not the bug in the software, but there were vulnerability found in the hardware. And so Intel started to write some patches to the Linux kernel to mitigate the impact of this vulnerability in their CPUs. And so the Linux kernel had to do like some extra stuff to prevent those vulnerability from being effective. And the way Intel made those patch impacted negatively all all CPUs, right? So it would make the Linux kernel a bit slower on Intel CPUs, but also on AMD and ARM and MIPS and whatever other CPU constructors. And you would expect Intel to do that, right? Like they don't really care about the Linux kernel performing very well on their competitors' product. Like this is not their problem, right? They want the Linux kernel to perform well on Intel CPUs, and they don't really care about the rest, right? But because AMD and ARM and MIPS and all those guys, they also are a big contributor to the Linux kernel. They were able to say, whoa, like this is not cool. You guys have a problem in your CPU. We understand that you need to fix it, but you need to fix it in a way that doesn't impact negatively other CPUs. And effectively at the end, it escalated pretty high. And at the end, Linus Torvald, told Intel, you need to scratch everything you do, and you need to redo it from scratch, basically, in a way that doesn't impact negatively other implementation. And Linus Torvald is able to do that because MIPS and ARM and those other guys, they also are contributor of influence in the Linux kernel, right? Like if those guys were nowhere to be seen and Intel was providing 90% of the resources to build the Linux kernel, then you would fully expect Linus Torvald to say, well, like we're merging that because, Intel is providing 90% of the resources, so we cannot tell them to fuck off, right?
Yes.
So you have like a balance of power that is happening there by having those different parties that are, like competitor on the market, but contribute to that project and they keep each other in check. And that didn't happen in BTC, right? On one side, you had Chain.Code Lab and Blockstream and a few other people that were putting up the resources to build it. And on the other side, you had a bunch of people yelling at them that they were not building the right stuff. And this, this just doesn't work. You don't get what you want this way.
So as they say, it's the golden rule. He who has the gold rules.
And it's proof of work, it's not just for mining, it's also for
building. Proof of work, proof of the result of your work, which is mining. And that's something that it makes it interesting to go to the topic of governance in general, because when we're talking about the entire reason why cryptocurrencies exist to begin with, it isn't necessarily just to build a better payment system, a better money, a thing like that. That's true, but a lot of that is to secure the future of that. And the only way you can secure the future of that is by making sure you protect against some kind of capture and control. And so, for example, we don't want a centralizing entity like a central bank to come in and say, well, you have to issue more Bitcoins because we need to pay for stuff, or you don't want that kind of thing to happen. And so that's the constant sort of fine line you walk with these projects, is you want something to be usable, to be very useful to people and have lots of network effects and be professionally built and developed. But then you don't want those people to be able to turn evil in some way. And that doesn't mean to perform worse in a technical capacity, but to start to change the product to become less useful to just a free world and everybody, And so, like, for example, the old Blockstream argument with Bitcoin is that Bitcoin used to be the revolutionary money for the whole world. And then a team came in and, because of their financial interests, decided to make it less useful for that, so it could be more useful for things like, say, liquid or products that they use like that. And so that there's nothing wrong with
but this is the market speaking, right? Like people put resources behind making Bitcoin good for liquid and stuff like that, and they didn't put it, they didn't put resources toward making Bitcoin good for more general monetary purposes. And so this is what Bitcoin become. There is no there is no attack there. This is just the market that works. Like what you reward on the market, you get more of, and what you don't reward, you get less of.
Now it is sort of at the same time is it's an inefficiency by some people who got involved, because I would say it's not like development funding is one part of investment in the network. The rest is, let's say, people who built things on top of Bitcoin, people who bought Bitcoins, people that build businesses on them, people that spent a lot of time and effort sharing the knowledge, getting new people to use it, all that kind of stuff. And it seems, I mean, depending on who, it is one of those ways where it's very hard to quantify to know for sure. But it seems like most of Bitcoin's value came from the sort of more Bitcoin Cash style vision, that people wanted that. And then the people paying the actual developers at the top wanted something different. And that's exactly why we have a whole bunch of different coins and ecosystem, is people, it was again, not a right or wrong, as in the market worked as intended, but the structure of Bitcoin was not in such a way that they could get what they got what they wanted. So they looked at other projects and started over. And so it's like,
well, there is a bit of that. There is also a bit of you kind of change your direction. So take Coinbase, for instance. In the early days, Coinbase was just, Bitcoin for people who were there. Like they did not list any other coin than Bitcoin. And anyway, Bitcoin was like 90% of the market. And that business was to, sell Bitcoin and also provide a platform where you can store your Bitcoin securely.
Mm.
When those fee problems started to rise, at the beginning it was bad for them, because at the beginning they were like, okay, no, there is less demand for Bitcoin and we are only listing Bitcoin, so we are losing money, yada yada yada, right? So for a while their incentive is to fight back against that, but you can only fight back against market forces for a while, especially if you are the only one fighting in that direction. So at some point you have to adapt to market forces. And so what did Coinbase do? Well, first they started listing Ethereum and Litecoin. So now they are like less tied to the future of Bitcoin generally. Plus, people are gonna trade between Ethereum and Bitcoin and whatnot, and they collect fees. So suddenly, the fact that Bitcoin is like not 90% of the market cap, but no, it's only like 70 or 60% is good for them, because there is more trading going on between those pairs. And the second step that they did is that they made this payment system where you can pay from one Coinbase account to another Coinbase account directly and not incur the fee on the network. And many companies started to integrate that system, like Burst.io integrated that system.
What's that system called?
I don't know what they called it, but effectively, like if you are a business and you would interface with Coinbase by some API, you could allow people who have a Coinbase account to pay you in Bitcoin directly, but it would go through Coinbase instead of going through the blockchain, and the fee would be much lower.
Yeah, so it's like
so if I have
Coinbase
a
is an
Coinbase
off-chain
account,
scaling solution.
yes, exactly, yeah, and Coinbase is collecting fee on that rather than the miner. So now that Coinbase has adapted to those changes, now they are benefiting from the situation, so they're not going to fight against it anymore, right? So the more you let it go, and the more people start to stop fighting against it and adapt to it, so it becomes the de facto situation.
Yeah, so it seems like this is a free market. Wherever we're trying to get maximum efficiency, if we go for a free market model. And the problem is people get very upset at, I would say, like the lack of a free market inside of a project, which is oddly enough, it's like arguing against a CEO of a company, because that's too centralized. It's dictatorial rule. But then those companies exist in the greater free market, and you can just work for a different company. You could patronize a different company. And so there seems to be, and this is one of those areas where it's more new, I would say new territory, because the free market is full of small centralized actors. It's just, that's all it is. There's a bunch of little dictators everywhere building their little business, their little sandwich shop. Whatever.
And the ones that are very competent become bigger and get more influence, and the ones that are incompetent go out of business and disappear.
Yes. And so that seems to be kind of where it works. And then when you enter the open source world, it's like the economic systems of the old world still work, but there's a new element of something that everyone can use and no one owns, sort of a thing. And now, of course, the saying who owns it is something that's happening, but it's kind of a little bit of an interesting wrinkle. And a lot of people think that because anyone can use the code, because no one profits, maybe miners or something, but no entity profits from them using it, that they have a sort of right to use it, whether or not the people who created it have a say. And so that's a kind of interesting way that's switched. So let's talk about a few governance models. So the ones that kind of used, I would call like the new corporate strategy, would be something like I would like to use the examples of Zcash and LBRY. Now they do essentially the same thing, which is, Zcash has a founder's reward where part of the block reward goes to the founding development team, and LBRY had a 50% pre-mine, where like half the coins went to LBRY Incorporated, and they're building a decentralized.
Ethereum is also
yes
like that, right? Like they effectively assign a bunch of coin to the Ethereum Foundation in the early days, and they are funding the project with that.
Yes, and I don't know too much about the Ethereum Foundation, how it works, or if there's like a way to join or governance thing, or if it's just a founding group of people. But it does seem to be that Ethereum works in a very specific way. And it's funny because when the whole DAO hack happened, Ethereum worked as a centralized entity, relatively speaking, and some people did not like it, and then they forked. And how much.
This is where it's different from a company.
Yes.
Like in the old world, is that you always have the option to take your bag and build your own stuff.
Yes, and I don't think people realize that Stellar is, I wouldn't say like a fork of Ripple, but it's basically one of Ripple's people left and created something very similar.
Yeah.
And these kinds of things tend to happen a lot more now. So there's that model where, say, you have a huge pre-mine and you just sit on that, and everyone understands that LBRY Incorporated does the development for LBRY. Everyone understands, no one has a problem with that. There's a foundation they gave a bunch of money to recently, but everyone understands that. Everyone understands the Zcash. Everyone understands with a few of these things. And it's kind of like the analogy would be, each of these cryptocurrency projects are centralized companies, just like in the free market, and they compete against each other, and the ones that win win, and the ones that don't. Then there's the sort of Wild West model, which I would say is Bitcoin's original model, or at least the way people understand it, and which is just, here it is, a group of volunteer developers create something. A lot of them mine something at the beginning, or they basically, because of their involvement in the project, they hope to get some money from the money that the value they create to the world. And sometimes that means begging for donations. Sometimes that means just being one of the biggest miners on the network early on and then having enough. And there's a few different ways. And it seems to where that has been, I would say, worked out, but where it seems to have resulted in less drama seems to be in projects that had basically where the founders sort of cheated in a little way. And I don't think that it's kind of harsh to say that about Satoshi, because this is not something that wasn't valuable at all at the time. It's not like, but it's just the fact he was one of the only miners in the beginning. I saw some article somewhere, which I didn't have the technical competence to completely understand, but basically said that they thought that he was running an optimized miner for a while that was not released to the public. And so there's things like that he gets a lot, like the founder then gets a lot more money kind of from cheating purposes. Charlie Lee.
And effectively get a head start, and they can do something with that.
Yeah, and Charlie Lee with Litecoin, I do know that Litecoin had like a very fast emission schedule in the very beginning, and he kind of is like de facto the owner of Litecoin, even though it's a technically decentralized project. And Monero had a fast mine thing in the beginning too, and then Fluffy Pony ran a lot of the infrastructure for wallets and stuff for most of the early history. And so it's like you get all this it's kind of like the corporate model, except they're saying it's not. There's a lot of that, but then you have a lot of
there is a lot like there is no leader in Bitcoin, Litecoin, whatever, but de facto there is.
Then you have the crazy, more like Wild West projects. Which one would say like Bitcoin Cash is one, or formerly one, or it depends on what happens in November, right? But it's basically one of those. Bitcoin was kind of one of those. I'm trying to think of a few others, but there have been a few that were sort of like that. And now that's where the idea of like what one would call intentional governance comes in. And so of course we have projects like Dash and then Decred as well. I'm not going to mention things like PivX, which are just kind of not trying to innovate on the front, just sort of copied Dash's model and figured it works. But so like Decred in particular seems to be going a step further by having people vote on the code changes specifically, not just
Tezos does that as well.
Oh yeah, and then of course the whole proof of stake kind of and delegated proof of stake model, that's a little bit of another thing. But basically, do you think there's any merit to a decision making kind of a function? So let's just imagine this council goes well, and imagine would there ever be an element for, say, the councils by proof of hash rate and proof of holding or whatever to be able to vote on what happens to the funds and where the direction goes or whatever in a protocol level way, not just they talk in the council and then it's decided later.
So there is a trade-off here, and it's not new to crypto actually. Like you can see that happen I think, like a very interesting word that crypto needs to draw from if you want to learn something is the programming language community, like people who create programming language and make them evolve, because they effectively have the same problem that crypto has. They have this open source ecosystem that is, like you have like the compiler and stuff like that actually, understand the language, but you have many people building application using the language and stuff like that. So they have a whole ecosystem. And the whole ecosystem has to agree on something. It's like all the language work and what is the semantic, and like if I write the code that way, what does it do? So they have a very similar problem where in blockchain you have the blockchain itself and the node software, and you have a whole ecosystem on top of it, and everybody has to agree on what are the consensus rules. So the parallel is it's there. It's very similar in many ways. And so you see the same type of model emerge from programming language community. And so the last model that you mentioned, that is like more like Dash or Decrypt or Tezos, is a process-oriented model, right? So it's like we have this process to make decisions, and as much as possible, this process needs to be like automated or work on rate, being very streamlined. Here is like if you want to change something about this project, here is like the different steps that you need to follow, and here is how the decision is made, and once the decision is made, then everybody goes with it. And so there are languages that are made like that. C++ is a very good example. So C++ has this C++ committee, and there is a way to submit stuff, and they have like very codified way to make decision if they accept, if they reject, or if the proposal needs to be improved or whatnot. And this works very well. This tends to create very stable project. And C++ is one example of that. Like C++ is more than 40 years old, which like in terms of computer stuff is effectively forever.
Of course.
And it's very stable. It's still one of the most used language in the world. But the trade-off that you make with this kind of system is that it tends to be fairly inefficient. And so changing something in the C++ standard, it's going to be a multi-year process that involve like many people that are world-class expert in their field. So they can come on the high salary, and if you count like the total dollar value of this whole process, it's like pretty high, right? And it takes a long time, and this is why you see C++ has only one new version every several years. And even then, half of them are like minor revision, right? So you get like C++ 11, that is a big improvement, and then C++ 14. 3 years later, it's just like small tweaks and small change on top of C++ 11. It's like more of a like we polish all the corners kind of improvement. And the next big one is C++ 17, right? So you effectively have 6 years between two version that bring major improvements, right? So this is like a very slow moving process, but this is a very stable process. And you see the same thing happening in crypto with crypto that adopt this kind of process. So Dash, for instance, is an example. And even though Dash has more resources at its disposal to like build its ecosystem and infrastructure than say BCH, it doesn't perform as well. And I think the main reason is because this bureaucratic system is less efficient. So to get like a similar level of result, you need more resources in that type of environment. But the flip side of that is that Dash is way more stable than say BCH, right? Like there are no crazy talk of fork every like years or 2 years or so. Like everybody is kind of like moving in the same direction. Like the project is much more focused. So this is the trade-off that you're making with those kind of system, right? They tend to be much more stable, but they don't move as fast, right? Or they need more resources to move as fast. So that's not a trade-off that is new to crypto.
Or anything really. Governance is an inherent friction. It introduces friction, but it introduces friction to avoid worse friction, so to speak. Whereas if you have a centralized system, everything is very efficient. but at some point you run the risk of a centralized system going in a
Going
wrong
completely
direction.
off rail. Yeah.
Yeah, and then with a completely decentralized, or what I would say like a Wild West system, then everything can move fast, but then you have a lot of the risk of fighting, which can be very inefficient. And then it's kind of like the let's just introduce some voluntary inefficiency to cut down on
Yeah.
other inefficiencies.
You are trading efficiency for stability, effectively, when you go there. And maybe like the craziest example of that is the state, right? So state lasts for many generations, but it depends in what part of the world. But there are states that last for many generations, and the state is like the most bureaucratic stuff ever and the less efficient stuff ever, right? Like anyone that have interacted with any administration in pretty much any country can attest of that.
Of course.
This is slow, this is inefficient, this is like very inflexible, but this is very stable. Like those organizations, they literally last for decades or even centuries. And so this is like the extreme end of that type of governance. And the opposite end are, probably startups and stuff like that, right? Like grow very fast. They are very efficient, very lean. They can build a lot of stuff very quickly. But they have a failure rate that is much higher because, like suddenly the people at the top take the wrong turn and everything goes to crap, right?
Yeah.
So like this is the trade-off.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because everything, of course, always comes down to economic incentives, and people will act in their economic best interests always. And when you have a centralized company or centralized development,
I would disagree with that.
Yes.
I think this is true, like in aggregate over extended period of time, because what's going to happen is that the people that don't act in their economic interest are going to become less and less relevant over time. But there is nothing preventing people to act against their economic interest.
Yes.
Right? And there are many examples of people doing that in crypto and outside crypto. But it's just that if people do that too many times, they effectively become irrelevant. So in aggregate, if you look at the whole stuff, in aggregate, it tends to do that over time.
Yes, and also even though they don't people have the right to make choices, and sometimes they can see down the road, oh, this is not, or they can see their relevance slipping, and then that they respond to that economic signal and proves it doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes the uncompetitive just go away, right?
This is what we're doing, right? This is what we're doing. We're saying that we don't have the resources to do what we want to do, what we think we need to be doing for that project to be successful, more than that. And we also see the value of BCH has been like doing okay, I guess, compared to most of the market, right? Because we're still one of the top coins. But if you compare it to the coins that are before it, it has not been like, if you count BCH in terms of BTC, for instance, like how much BTC you need to spend to buy one BCH, you see that the value is going down over time. So that's not a good trend. That means that we are performing worse than BTC on that front. So clearly the market is telling us that there is something that we're not doing right. And we have ideas on what needs to happen, to do those stuff right. But the first step toward that is getting the resources to be able to execute on those ideas. And this is where, like, you cannot cheat the market there.
Of course.
What we've done so far has not been successful to raise those resources, so we need to try something else. And we're responding to that. And like any group is either forced to do that at some point or become irrelevant.
Yeah, of course. And that works, of course, at the larger scale. It works in a kind of shorter scale. For example, if people are paid, they're going to work harder. If they're not paid, they're not going to necessarily work as hard. And so we have if you have a company that has revenue and leadership, then of course they respond to trying to increase the revenue and stuff like that. And sometimes, of course, they risk the dead end problem, but generally they see what's going on, they try to survive. And
if they are competent, but maybe they can be incompetent and make the wrong choices. But they're gonna try to do that at least. Yeah, they're gonna try to maximize their revenue.
Yeah, it's so then at the other end of the spectrum, we have a, fully leaderless sort of project, directionless project, where people do still have economic incentives, but they try to pretend that they don't. So
Yes.
they just, oh, if people will like it, they'll fund it or whatever. It's not just like if developers will say, I'm just going to develop for free, and if people like what I do, then I'll get paid, voluntarily. It doesn't always work out quite like that. And also, there's some people that say, hey, if I spin up a troll farm and start yelling at people and do whatever, and I manage to capture this project and make a
Mm-hmm.
Wild West situation a relatively centralized kind of a thing, then I
So
personally profit.
may I interrupt you, because I think you are hitting here to a
Mm-hmm.
very key idea. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know if you know, but I before working in crypto, I used to work at Facebook, and this is something that
Mm-hmm.
was like very evident working on Facebook. And I think this is probably one of the most important stuff that is happening in the world right now, and nobody's talking about it, and it's like way bigger than crypto. It's that we had a very, very important shift in terms of information that happened over, like, about 10 years ago, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
And for the whole human history, the problem that we had was getting information, right? So if you are a scientist in the time of Newton or whatever, you want to know what are the latest work of Newton, but you don't even live in the UK, so you live in Germany or Italy or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is difficult, right? Like, because you need to get someone to print that fucking book, and getting shipped over several countries by horses and whatnot, and it's gonna cost you a fortune. And you need to probably like speak English, even though you live in Italy, and you literally meet like nobody that speak English ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like people travel like today and we can watch movie in foreign languages and whatnot, right? So the bar is like very, very high to get access to the information at all, right? And um, as we improve our way to transmit information, then this problem has diminished, and this whole stuff now has flipped on its head. Like, we have way more information now that our attention span allow us to process.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem that we have now is not censorship. It's that we need to extract the relevant information from the sea of information that we have. And we see that the very, very big success company on the internet are actually doing that. Like, you look at Google, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
What Google does is hiding information from you. It's like Google knows about all the information that is public on the internet,
Yeah.
but you tell them, tell me everything about BCH or Dash or whatever, and they're gonna tell you, maybe 10 websites or so that are relevant to what you ask, and hide everything else from you, right? So uh, this is their business. And Facebook is similar, right? Facebook is like, choose a different mechanism to choose what information is relevant to you. And but this is the same idea, right? It's like, I know a bunch of information about a bunch of people, but I'm going to show to you all the information from people that are strongly connected to you via some social graph, right? Because we assume that information from people is more relevant to you than information from people you don't
Of
know.
course.
And all those company, if you think about it that way, all those company, this is kind of what they're doing. Like Amazon as well, it's like knows about bazillion of products and try to only show you the one you're interested in. So the whole world has flipped on its head, and many of the framework that we use about censorship and stuff like that are effectively completely obsolete and quite often very counterproductive. So
Mm-hmm.
when you say, like, we must not kick anyone from the community, there is free speech, everybody needs to talk and stuff like that, what happens in practice when you do that? And this was the golden standard for literally centuries, right? This is like, if you want to have the best community that have the best information, that have the best result, this is what you need to do. You need to allow everybody to speak, because speak was expensive, and way more expensive than the attention span that people had. And so you wanted to get like as much information as you could, even in some of it is bad. This is okay because you are information starved,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now we are like, completely the opposite. We have way too much information. And so when you do that, effectively someone hire a troll farm, like you mentioned, and can completely overrun the whole ecosystem and make it look like, some idea or some opinion or whatever is like the dominant one, but it's just a bunch of civils, that are pushing for that idea. And so the challenge that we're gonna face as and it's way bigger than crypto, but the challenge that humanity is facing now is like, how do we move from a world that is information scarce from a world that is information abundant? And this is a huge challenge, and the framework that we have are really bad. And this is, I'd say, this is the root problem that we're tackling with this council stuff. If I am to look back with what we're doing with BCH, because we want to extract the voice from the actors that actually matter out of the noise, right? This is the number one stuff we are achieving there, and fun, getting funding, obviously, but getting funding is just like getting the resources to do something. So what do you want to do? And what we're doing, like this is the first point we're addressing. And I think this is not very well understood at large, not specifically in crypto, but in general. But this is going to be you see like a bunch of meltdown from the traditional media and everybody going crazy on Twitter and nobody understands what's going on. Like the Trump election and stuff like that is like, completely surreal when you look at it. People are literally losing their mind over it, right? And this is because of that. We have way to process information that are not adapted to that phase change. Like the world has flipped on its head when it comes to information. And
well, it's funny.
Information technology has always been the most, because like information technology is what makes humans different from other animals. Right? And every time we had a shift in information technology, it has transformative effect on society that are like absolutely crazy, way beyond what everybody can imagine. Like, the printing press or the telephone or this kind of stuff transform society in very profound way. And so I'm not sure what's going to come out of this, but like, this is sure very interesting. And this is curious that not more people are looking at that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the entire human existence up until very recently has been a struggle against scarcity. There's not enough food. There's not enough anything. And if you look at the old food that people used to eat when they could, it was whatever had the most fat, whatever had the most carbohydrates, whatever had the most anything, because they needed it to not die. And then now in the age of abundance, we're having to rediscover scarcity, where everyone is trying to find the least nutritious foods to eat because they don't want to get fat. And it's the same thing with information. It's like any information. People used to get a book and just sit there and like read this book for like months. And that's the one book they had, and they read it like 5 times. And here people can barely read a tweet and they get bored because there's so much information. And then the value isn't in more information because there's already too much. The value is in restricting the information.
Yeah, or extracting the information that has the most value, but we don't quite know to do that very well.
Yes, we're learning. Well, this has been a very fantastic chat. Where should I direct users to, viewers, to go find out more about what you're doing?
Well, bitcoincash.org is obviously the main website about Bitcoin Cash. So if they want to learn about that, if they want to learn about Bitcoin Cash, this is the place. If they want to learn about the more technical nitty-gritty of what Bitcoin UBC, so it's the node software that is powering that network, they can go to bitcoinabc.org, especially reviews.bitcoinabc.org is where all the technical work happens. So if they're interested in that, they can do that, right? But otherwise, if they're more interested in like what we're doing and the project and the currency, bitcoincash.org is where it's at.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.